Biden wins, China wins. It's as simple as that. If we win, America wins. You know that. You've seen that. We built the greatest economy in the history of the world. And now we are very simply, we're doing it again, and we're on track to have the best year we've ever had next year. And I've spent the last 4 years bringing jobs back to our country. We never had so many jobs. Never forget, they're coming after me because I'm fighting for you. And they know my policies will lift America to new heights of national greatness like we've never seen before. And we will make America great again.
And now we're opening with a bang.
And today's announcement proves that our economy is roaring back. It's coming back extremely strong. The United States economy added almost 5 million jobs. Likewise, Hispanic employment is up by 1.5 million jobs. 3 million more women were employed in the month of June.
This is better than a V. This is a rocket ship.
Joe Biden is an economic arsonist. That statement may sound shocking, but it's true. He has spent decades in the Washington swamp torching the industrial might of America. I'll explain more about that in a moment. Welcome to Maganomics. I'm Steve Cortez, senior advisor to President Trump's re-election campaign. With me tonight are Congressman Ted Budd from the great state of North Carolina and Gary Rabine of the Ditch Digger CEO podcast. Our guests will join us later in the show, but first, let's talk about the threat that Joe Biden presents to our prosperity. The reasons why Joe Biden would be disastrous for our country and for our economy. Last week, we saw Joe Biden finally leave his basement safe space. He hit the campaign trail as the race tightens, especially in battleground states. Joe headed for Michigan. For decades, the Great Lakes state was considered solidly Democratic, part of the, quote, blue wall in the Midwest in favor of the Democrats. But then candidate Trump broke through that barrier. His electoral revolt of the outsiders convinced the good people of Michigan to break ranks in 2016 and select a Republican nominee for the first time since the 1980s. Amazingly, Biden actually had the gall to go to the industrial heartland, to Michigan of all places, and promise that he's going to return jobs back from China. That's like an arsonist who burned down a village, returning to that town to promise the citizens of the town that he wants to be their fire marshal, to protect them. Joe Biden spent a half century in the Washington swamp, exporting American jobs all over the world, particularly to China. That is the one, quote, accomplishment of his half century in the Beltway. Terrible trade deals, specifically NAFTA and China's inclusion in the World Trade Organization, which led to the loss of a staggering 92,000 manufacturing jobs in Michigan alone. Joe Biden spent 47 years shipping America's jobs to our foreign competitors, leaving a mess that President Trump has had to clean up over the last 4 years. Part of cleaning up Joe Biden's mess was getting rid of NAFTA, which cost America 850,000 jobs, and negotiating the USMCA with Canada and Mexico that is now bringing jobs back as we speak. However, in an interview with Jake Tapper last week, Joe Biden completely ignored his very own record with NAFTA. He refused to give President Trump credit for actually fixing the mistakes of the past. Have a listen.
Something else he did is he renegotiated NAFTA.
He did.
He renegotiated NAFTA. Now, when you ran for president and when Barack Obama ran for president, you both said you would renegotiate NAFTA. You didn't. He did. Nancy Pelosi said that the USMCA, which President Trump signed into law, is a, quote, victory for America's workers. Does he deserve credit for that?
No, I think, remember, he wasn't the one that pushed that particular one that passed. The House amended the bill, so he couldn't.
He signed it.
By the way, it's a big deal, though. Here's what they amended. He was giving pharma a way out, giving them a gigantic break. just like he's doing now with pharma. They're building plants overseas and getting tax breaks for it. That's what it was about with him. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do.
He renegotiated NAFTA and you didn't, is the point. I mean,
because we had a Republican Congress that wouldn't go along with us renegotiating it.
But doesn't he deserve some credit for that? It's better. The USMCA is better than NAFTA.
It is better than NAFTA.
Joe Biden proudly voted for NAFTA as a senator back in the 90s. But in the Jake Tapper interview, he bizarrely said that he was against it after it passed. Biden had his John Kerry moment, asking the American people to pretend to believe that he was for NAFTA before he was against it. That's blatantly false. Joe Biden defended NAFTA for many years after its passage. Speaking of falsehoods, when Jake Tapper properly pressed Biden, inquiring why he did not fix NAFTA as vice president, Biden completely lied, claiming that he could not renegotiate the terrible treaty because of opposition from a GOP-controlled Congress. Well, Joe seldom lets the pesky facts get in the way. Here's the actual truth. For the first 2 years of the Obama-Biden administration, Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate. With total control of the federal government, they could have easily pushed through a New Deal with Canada and Mexico, but instead focused on Democrat agenda items like Obamacare. In fact, the Obama-Biden administration announced that they would not attempt to renegotiate NAFTA only 3 months into their first term. They had no interest in helping American workers. And I can tell you that has not changed since they left office. Meanwhile, in the past 4 years, President Trump has made historic progress in bringing jobs back to America and renegotiating bad trade deals with both foreign allies and adversaries. As I previously mentioned, look no further than the USMCA, possibly President Trump's biggest trade achievement so far. The USMCA is expected to bring 176,000 jobs back to the United States in a move that will revitalize manufacturing and industry. That trade pact with our neighbors and allies, Canada and Mexico, provides the economic and diplomatic template for more trade deals into Trump's second term. After all, we believe in America first, but not in America alone. We can and should trade with the world. International commerce can benefit both sides of transactions when the playing field is level and the terms are fair and reciprocal. Unfortunately, before President Trump, successive U.S. administrations allowed China to abuse American workers. The Beijing regime manipulated America with the willing complicity of a lot of big business multinational CEOs and their Washington toadies like Joe Biden. China was not a trading partner, but rather a trade exploiter. Donald Trump recognized this iniquity and moved quickly as president to address it. President Trump levied tariffs on them, compelling new trade negotiations on terms that prioritize American workers and American products. In contrast, Joe Biden now promises to lift those trade sanctions without demanding any new concessions at all from the Chinese Communist Party. Just a party favor gift of sorts for the tyrants of the CCP from their good pal, Beijing Biden. Perhaps part of Joe's goodwill toward the Chinese Politburo flows from the gigantic investments of hard cash that the CCP directed to his son, Hunter. The wayward Hunter hopped on Air Force Two for an official visit with Dad to China. After meetings with government officials there, the CCP-controlled Bank of China miraculously invested $1.5 billion, that's with a B, in Hunter's new fund, even though the younger Biden had almost no track record in that industry. No wonder the Bidens remain soft on China, unwilling to stand up to Beijing on behalf of American labor. On the other hand, President Trump is constantly working on behalf of American labor, and lately the results shine. As I mentioned in last week's episode of Maganomics, this burgeoning economic revival afoot in our land produced 1.4 million new jobs in the most recent report for August, bringing the total job gains over the last 4 months to a historic 10.6 million new hires. An economic renaissance is underway. But there's more proof than just the number of new jobs added back to the economy. Let's take a look at surging car sales data. Before China's coronavirus hit our shores, this year started off strong with 6.6% annual car growth year over year. Unfortunately, the coronavirus hit and car sales plummeted to a negative 33% rate year over year in April. But now, car sales have surged. They've roared back to a 4-year record with 8.1% year over year growth. Folks, that's not just a V, that's a super V. And that is only happening because of President Trump's pro-growth policies and economic nationalism. And that's exactly what this election is about. The choice between President Trump and Joe Biden is the choice between economic nationalism and the globalist pre-2016 era of wage stagnation and the offshoring of America's production. If we want the economy's historic rebirth to continue and accelerate, we must re-elect President Trump. He's the only candidate on the ballot this November who is a proven job creator, a champion for American nationalism, and a leader who is tough and clear-eyed enough to confront the economic and national security threats of the Chinese Communist Party. Tonight's guests can talk about how the Trump approach to trade and the economy has benefited their states and their businesses. As usual, we will first talk the economy from a macro perspective and then drill down to the micro, to Main Street. But first, we have a short commercial break and we're going to be right back after this.
Antifa is destroying our communities, rioting, looting. Yet Joe Biden kneels down and his staff sends money for bail. And Biden fails to stand up to the radical leftists fighting to defund and abolish the police. With Biden kneeling to the left, we'd have chaos in the streets. President Trump is standing up for us, keeping our communities safe, protecting minority-owned businesses, and always standing for our flag.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
You have reached the 911 police emergency line. Due to defunding of the police department, we're sorry, but no one is here to take your call. If you're calling to report a rape, please press 1. To report a murder, press 2. To report a home invasion, press 3. For all other crimes, leave your name and number, and someone will get back to you. Our estimated wait time is currently 5 days. Goodbye.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Welcome back. I'm Steve Cortez, and my first guest tonight is Congressman Ted Budd of North Carolina. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus. Congressman Budd, welcome to the show.
Steve, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Congressman, your state of North Carolina has benefited greatly under President Trump's pro-growth and pro-American economic policies. So can you tell us about some ways that North Carolinians are benefiting under President Trump's leadership?
Yeah, well, one of the first things I would look at is the regulatory cut. I mean, they have gone into the Federal Register and just started removing and examining regulations that are just in the way. We've got, WOTUS, or Waters of the U.S., which previously under an Obama administration could look at a wet patch where you might get a tractor stuck in a farmer's field and call that a wetland, a federal wetland. And so it has reined some of that in, and just let businesses and farmers know that this administration is on their side, and they can plan for the future and make good decisions and invest in their farms and in their small businesses. Then you think about what happened in January of 18 when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act led by the president. And I remember going to a small business, and she owned a furniture business and still does. And she was thinking about buying a saw for her business. Now, this is not something like you get at the local hardware store. This is a $250,000 saw. And she said, because of these Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the provisions inside of them, I'm going to buy 4 of them, and I'm going to hire more people. So that's $1 million of reinvestment into our economy that she made, and she hired more people. So well over $1 million just because of, and that's in one small area in one county. In an industry that had previously been hurt by NAFTA 1.0. And Steve, the other thing I would say is the USMCA. And remember, this came right on the heels of impeachment that the Democrats had led, and the president wasn't hindered by that. He came out and said, "I'm still for America." He had every reason to retreat, but he said, "I'm still going to help the American workers. And we're going to undo what NAFTA 1.0 did, and we're going to do the USMCA." that helped our farmers even more. I have one of the biggest dairy producing counties in North Carolina. And years ago, they had about 200 dairy farms in this one county. Iredell is just north of Charlotte. And now it's down to about 20. So about 10% of what it used to have. But because of the provisions with Canada, that we have increased the amount of dairy we can sell to Canada triple. So they can sell 3 times as much dairy product into Canada as before, which Canada had been very protectionistic. But the president and his team worked to open that back up. So this will be great for our farmers and, again, allow them to reinvest in their farms and in their local businesses.
You know, I'm so glad you mentioned trade, Congressman, and I know North Carolina in a lot of ways was really harmed. You mentioned the furniture industry, dairy, obviously the textile business historically has been so important to the Carolinas, both north and south. And those are industries which were largely decimated by terrible trade deals all over the world. And you mentioned NAFTA, which, of course, I really think Joe Biden has now had his John Kerry moment. And what I mean by that is he now claims that he was for NAFTA before he was against NAFTA. He also lied on CNN last week. He said that the reason he didn't fix NAFTA, because he claims he had turned on the treaty, and he said the reason he didn't fix it was because he didn't have there was a Republican Congress. Except the first 2 years of the Obama-Biden years, they had complete control, both houses of Congress, as well as the White House. So that tells me, Congressman, that they decided Joe Biden was clearly happy with the NAFTA agreement. And for that matter, his fingerprints have been all over every trade deal that has afflicted American workers for generations.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme, Steve, between the 2016 and now the 2020 Democrat nominee for president. Is they were for something before they were against it, before they were for it. So it's quite confusing, and we understand the confusion this year with Biden, and it seems to get worse. And I don't think that's really the last policy gap that he's going to have before November. You know, this the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and you look at the USMCA, and you look at trade, and then you look at the decimation that we've had with COVID, which didn't have to be this bad. And you look at a lot of governors who have locked down their states. It's happened in my state here, unfortunately.
Right.
But one business, and you mentioned textiles, Steve, one business came to me and they were nearly in tears because they had this business. It was a multi-generation, small family business producing textiles in my district. And they were on the verge of having to close and lay off all of their employees. But because of the PPP, they realized that businesses are the best check writers in our country, much more efficient than government itself. Right. So they worked through businesses to get money in the hands of the American worker, and that's what they did. And she came to me and she says, it's still hard, but our doors are open and we didn't have to lay off one single employee because of the PPP. And I think that was a great plan.
Right. Well, and look, here's the thing, you know, regarding PPE and this economic renaissance, which is happening in the country right now. You know, none of us, we're not being Pollyannas. We know that all is not well. There is still, understandably, a lot of anxiety out there. We are not back to the heights of the Trump boom that we enjoyed in the early part of this year. But nonetheless, I think it's important for us, Congressman, to recognize the progress we have made and the rapid rise the American economy is showing. It's not just a V, as the president often now says, it's a super V. And the data show us that. If we look at things, I spent 25 years on Wall Street, so I'm a bit of a data geek. I really follow these economic numbers extremely closely. And the latest numbers are just nothing short of astounding. When you look at home sales, for example, July was the biggest month for home sales in American history. Car sales rose to a 4-year high. And of course, the jobs come back. The latest jobs report that we received for August showed 1.4 million jobs added in that month alone, bringing the total to over 10 million new jobs over the last 4 months. And by the way, not just jobs, but quality jobs, because the wage increase number to me was perhaps the best news within that jobs report. It showed a 4.7% annual year-over-year wage growth number. So to me, there are a lot of reasons, solid data-driven reasons to be optimistic here. Can you share with us, you know, what did President Trump do and what did you Republicans do to encourage and to create the conditions for this kind of rapid recovery for our economy out of the lows that were created by the China virus?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and when you talk about data, that really gets me excited. You know, Steve, when you look at numbers and you look at like the 1.4 million jobs that were created in August, you have to put those in context. A regular month, a good month, we would add a couple of 100,000 jobs and we would celebrate. We're doing 10 times that per month. And remember, we went into a really deep V because of the coronavirus, and we probably needed to do that early on. But now we realize, hey, look, we got a handle on this. We can come back out. We know how to social distance. We know how to wear our personal protective equipment. We know how to wash our hands. Let people decide, and let's push towards reopening. Let's get money in the hands of businesses because they're the most efficient. And let's keep these things open because we don't want to have to just restart the economy. But we're seeing 10 million jobs added, and that's since the last 4 months. That's unprecedented. And I talked to a realtor just last night, sells homes in the $200,000 range. He says you just can't find any homes now because there's such a strong demand for regular working people to have a home that they're paying over the listing price in regular blue collar neighborhoods. And this is fantastic. And this is the kind of American comeback that we want. Unfortunately, it happened on the heels of COVID, but we're headed in a great direction. And again, over 10 million jobs and more to come. And I think 2021, with the right president, with President Trump in place, that we're going to have an even stronger economy than we had at the end of 2019.
No, I agree. With the momentum that we have right now in this country, both the sentiment that's out there, the confidence that we can do this, as well as, as we're talking about the hard data on the ground that show us the trajectory of this economy right now. If we reelect President Trump, I really firmly believe that 2021 could be the greatest economic year in American history. And I don't think that's an exaggeration to project that out. But I want to also ask you about a topic that I know you're passionate about, and this has an economic component to it, and that is the left-wing violence that we've seen in a lot of our cities all over the place. And I say it's got an economic component because, for instance, in my hometown of Chicago, Michigan Avenue, which is the premier shopping district, because of the rioting and looting that has gone on, a lot of those very high-end stores, wonderful restaurants are still to this day boarded up. And when you think about what that does to an economy, what that does to the jobs market in Chicago, to the tax base, all of that, there's of course a safety component, which is most important to the rioting, but there's also an economic component when these entire neighborhoods are burned to the ground and destroyed in these Democrat-run cities across America. So tell us, Congressman Budd, what do you and President Trump and the Republicans want to do to combat this kind of senseless violence across our country?
Absolutely, Steve. So the main thing is to remember that we are for law and order. We are for safety and security. We want people not to fear going outside, one for their health, and the other is for their physical safety. We want to bring criminals to justice. And when there is a very rare aberration inside law enforcement, which is, of course, tragic, maybe like we saw with George Floyd and some other cases, we need to let that investigation play out. But we will not put up with violence. And if you want to protest, that's fine. That's part of our First Amendment rights as a country to protest. But don't call violent riots and violent protest the same thing as a peaceful assembly. They're totally different. Look, we get it. We hear you when people want to protest, regardless of where they are in the political spectrum. And that's one of the things that makes our country great. But also, we are grateful for those on our frontline first responders, particularly in this time, our police officers. We want them to know that we have their back and we're grateful for what they do for us and we support them. We want them to be fully funded and realize they reflect society. It's not a racial division issue because every police department, every sheriff's office that I am, they really reflect the communities that they serve. And one of the things you saw in the RNC, which was so inspiring to me, is that this was real America and it didn't make, it wasn't one race or the other. It was all of us in this together, regardless of your ethnicity or background. And I think that's one of the things that we should remember as Americans.
Sure. I think if you compare the DNC to the RNC, I like to say that theirs was Hollywood and ours was the heartland. And we really saw that.
Absolutely.
We really showcased a lot of regular Americans. I've had a number of them on this show, people who may not be well known, but people who have done incredible things in their communities, and a lot of them being small business folks. And to your point, too, about, corporate media in this country, unfortunately, constantly tries to conflate peaceful protest, peaceful assembly, which is just and right and constitutional, with rioting, which is, of course, none of that. And I myself have been a part of a lot of peaceful protests. I've been at many pro-life events, pro-Second Amendment events that were entirely peaceful, respectful, law-abiding, and in fact, incredibly courteous to law enforcement people who were there to help guard those assemblies. That's a sacred part of American culture and of our Constitution. Speaking of the Second Amendment, I know that you own a gun shop in North Carolina. I want to ask you about being a small business owner. What can you say about your experience as a small business owner, and then also as it relates to President Trump's commitment to protect the Second Amendment?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of news organizations ask me about the Second Amendment and do we need to do this or that? But it was under President Trump. I mean, he signed into law the FIX NICS, which is the National Instant Criminal Background Check Service, which is maintained by the FBI. So we want good database. We want to keep firearms out of the hands of those who are dangerous and those who are criminal. But we realize the vast majority of Americans are safe, they're law-abiding, they're responsible, and we want them to have access should they want to have use of the Second Amendment and have their own firearm. And by the way, the store I have would be glad to help train them. Our motto is helping our community responsibly enjoy firearms. That's really what we want to do. We're about community. We're about responsibly enjoying firearms. So it's been a real privilege. We've owned it for 10 years. We bought it for our local law enforcement. And it was them that said, never underestimate the need of the public to have a safe place to shoot. And I really think that the president and also his kids understand that. Don Jr., Eric, I mean, they're both avid sportsmen and safe shooters and very responsible people. So I really think they get it. And being from New York, which is so restrictive, and Chicago, which is so restrictive, as you know, having roots there. And those are some of the worst areas. The most dangerous place to be is in a gun-restricted zone. What you want is the good guys to have a gun to stop the bad guys that have a gun or whatever weapon of their choice. And there's more good guys than there are bad guys. And that's where the Second Amendment comes into play and helps us to keep order in this country, is we want the criminals to fear the good guys.
Right. Congressman, so appreciate your time tonight. But before we let you go, I want to ask you if there's something else you'd like to tell our audience. As you say in the Congress, I yield the floor, I guess, to you. Is there something you'd like to say to the Maganomics audience?
Look, I thank you for being a great supporter of the president, and to pray for him, support him. And let's go out to those that are maybe a few of them that are still on the fence, that aren't quite sure yet, and ask what they're about. Think about the next Supreme Court. Think about the future generations. Think about who actually has brought prosperity to our country, and that's our current president. And we got to separate style. Not everybody loves his style. I happen to really like him. I get him. I know him, and I appreciate him. But you got to look at what he's done for our country, and I just think it's been phenomenal, and we need to give him another 4 years.
Congressman Ted Budd, thank you so much. Folks, we'll be right back after this.
Thank you.
We know you want to give Donald Trump 4 more years to fight for you in Washington, but he isn't just up against Joe Biden. He's up against the Democrat fundraising machine, and he needs all the help he can get. Don't just assume because his opponent hasn't completed a single sentence that this campaign is over. Crazy things happen, like this woman becoming Speaker of the House. Support the president today by texting Trump to 88022. Donald Trump is counting on every single one of his supporters to text Trump to 88022 now.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Joe Biden has embraced the policies of the radical left. Trillions in new taxes, crushing middle-class families.
If you elect me, your taxes are going to be raised, not cut.
Amnesty for 11 million illegal immigrants.
Citizenship for 11 million undocumented folks.
Reducing police funding.
Yes. Absolutely.
The radical left has taken over Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. Don't let them take over America.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Welcome back to Maganomics. I'm Steve Cortez, and I'm joined now by successful entrepreneur Gary Rabine, owner of a lot of businesses and the broadcaster of the Ditch Digger CEO podcast. Gary, thanks for taking the time to join us tonight.
Hey, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate being here.
You bet. So, Gary, you like me, you're from the Midwest. So if anybody knows the area well, formerly known as the Rust Belt, it's you. President Trump won the Upper Midwest in 2016 by promising to bring manufacturing jobs back. And he's accomplished exactly that, particularly pre-China virus. But I want to ask you, since you're from there, what have you seen firsthand in the Midwest? How have President Trump's policies helped Americans on the ground, specifically in the industrial heartland?
Yeah, so we saw, amazing difference when the Obama administration was in office. Our customers were kind of holding back from spending. We run 10 companies that do maintenance for facilities, Midwestern and all across the country, but Midwest is kind of heavy. Pavement, rehabilitation, roofing maintenance, door and dock maintenance, and this kind of stuff for big facilities owners. So what we saw was our customers spending just enough to maintain, but not going above and investing further in their properties as much as they usually would through the administration of Obama and Biden. Well, Trump got in office and passed his new tax plan, and man, the floodgates opened up. Our customers, our customers, manufacturing, retail, distribution, began spending like they hadn't spent in decades. So our business, as well as anybody in our space, saw opportunity like never before. So for me, it was just a stark difference that 12 months made, even, right, from the time that he took office. Now, this what people are calling a pandemic is being treated in our state, in Illinois, pretty bad, in my opinion, right? We've shut down business all over. We see business across the country because we work in every state in the country. Illinois and New York, some of our states that we do a lot of work in, are suffering now, kind of like when the Obama administration was in place.
Right.
People aren't spending as much. They're holding back on spending again, in fear of what's ahead, as far as how long do we shut down these states like Illinois, right?
Right. I want to ask you about that aspect, Gary, because I think this is so important. The really unfair and unneeded restrictions, which a lot of Democratic mayors and governors around the country are inflicting upon American society. Really, it's not just the economy, but obviously the economy is a huge part of that. Because lately we've seen, and I've talked about a lot on this show, the economic data lately has been unbelievably surprising and optimistic to the upside. I mean, it really, the hard data on the ground shows us, whether you're looking at jobs or car sales or home sales, industrial production, you name it, that this economy is roaring back to life. But it's doing it to some degree, Gary, with one hand. We're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. And I say that because the places you mentioned, unfortunately, a lot of the coastal governors, as well as Pritzker in Illinois, these governors are punishing the economy, not for reasons of health or science, but for reasons of politics. And that tells me that post-election, if President Trump wins, when he wins into a second term, as these unfair restrictions, unneeded restrictions start to get eased up, this economy can just totally roar. Your thoughts on that topic, particularly since you're somebody who does business in multiple states?
Yeah, so for me, I am a crazy entrepreneur. People say I'm nuts. I've started 25 companies in the last 20 years, and I have a lot of fun developing leaders. So not only do I have these fun companies that we're part of, but today it's 10 companies that we actually own and operate. But for me, I have a blast mentoring leaders. I have a blast talking about entrepreneurship, because I believe it's the only way we save our country, our state of Illinois, number one, and our country as well. I mean, Trump has done amazing things to bring business back to our country like never before, right? And so for me, I look at Illinois as a microcosm of what could be. When I say, Pritzker is ruining our economy. I've got many friends. I mentor a lot of people in business because I have this thing called True Mentors also. It's a nonprofit. We have a bunch of small business minded people that either are small business owners, want to be small business owners, or leaders in business. And so we mentor them with CEOs across the Chicagoland area. We have a blast with it. But what we're seeing is some of our friends in small businesses are losing their businesses. Some of them are actually not so small even, right? Some of our friends that are running nice mid-sized businesses are closing their doors now. When I say this, it's sickening to watch when it's not necessary. Right. So again, I believe that we got to get our state back to work as well as our country. I mean, our country overall, like you're saying, is coming back strong. But we have these lockdown areas like Illinois, New York, and others that I believe are really hurting our economy overall. It could be a crazy economy right now, in my opinion. Instead, we're kind of stumbling along as a country, while states like Illinois are just dying and killing business in many ways.
Right. No, listen, I think the economic comeback right now, again, is incredibly encouraging. That's not just my opinion. That's what the data tell me. But it could be so much better if we could get some of these crucial places, crucial parts of the country that are normally big economic engines, places like New York, Chicago, and the whole state of California. We need to get them thriving again. By the way, to connect this back to this election, Joe Biden, let's remember, has threatened that he would shut the entire country down again. He said that on the record. He's now trying, as he often does, to weasel around it and say, well, I didn't really mean what I said. But I think we know where he stands. He would in the snap of a finger, if he thought it were expedient, shut this country down again. And President Trump, of course, says that is absolutely not happening. We know how to handle the risks of the virus. We know how to mitigate it. Lots of places in this country are doing it really, really effectively. Red states, that are thriving. But I want to ask about you, Gary, because, you mentioned how many companies you've started. You really are, we could call you a serial entrepreneur, much better than being a serial killer, right, Gary? But really, you clearly have this as part of your makeup. But what sparked that startup mentality? Can you give us a glimpse into your beginnings in business and your mindset in approaching business, and why is it that you have this yearning and almost this need to start new operations?
Yeah, no, I think I started as a kid. I started as a kid understanding how to make money when money was a tough thing to come by. So as a young person, my dad worked in a factory and worked every side job he could to raise a family of 6 kids. And I watched that. And so at 10, 11, 12 years old, I began working and newspaper routes, mowing lawns and so on. And I love work, right? I love the dignity of work, to have money in my pocket when my friends usually didn't, right? So I guess that carried on into, as a young person, 18 years old, didn't go to college, and was kind of laughed at as the ditch digger. That's why my podcast is called Ditch Digger CEO. I'll never forget the time my friends laughed at me because I was one of the only ones in my class, or amongst my friends anyway, that had no aspiration to college at that time. So again, started my business at an early age, and it was pretty easy for me to do business and make a lot of mistakes, of course, because without an education in economics and business law and all the things that you learn as you stumble through being an entrepreneur, it wasn't easy. But bottom line is, I figured it out, and within a short period of time, our little paving business grew to a bigger paving business, and eventually grew to a regional business, and eventually a national paving business. So for us, we're very blessed that we were able to do this in America, and I sincerely believe this is the only place in the world you can do it. And I'm really worried that we're wrecking that for our future generations, especially with a guy like Biden. I mean, this person, in my opinion, has no clue of what job creation is about. Right? We have a president we're so blessed with. When have we ever had a president that has understood how to build and create jobs like this guy, right? And he continues to run our country like a big business,
right?
Not cowering to any big donors or big industry. I mean, he does what he thinks is right for the American people, and boy, we're blessed to have him, and we better keep him, because Joe Biden is the exact opposite of that, in my opinion.
Right.
And again, if I judge things only on job creation and entrepreneurship and building our country, right, this president is our best answer for sure.
Right. I think that contrast is so important, particularly when we look at the economy and entrepreneurship and free enterprise in this country. If you compare and contrast these two, you look at Joe Biden, he has spent 47 years in the Washington swamp. He has worked on the government payroll for his entire adult life. I like to joke, but it's actually true, the only job he ever created was for Hunter Biden, where he followed along, tagged along Vice President Dad, Joe Biden, and picked up amazing business deals around the world that no other person could get except for through family connections. And then contrast that with President Trump, who is quite literally a builder of magnificent skyscrapers, golf courses, resorts all over this country, an employer, somebody who sides the front of paychecks and the back of paychecks. So his experience, I think, has been so valuable to this country. He has so much respect for entrepreneurs, and he believes, as I do, that entrepreneurs are the unsung heroes of American society. I don't think we spend enough time celebrating them, but we do here on Maganomic. We sure do on this show. But I want to ask you about, you mentioned that you got the moniker Ditch Digger, which you clearly have embraced, even if it was initially meant as an insult. Your Ditch Digger CEO podcast, why did you decide, you're a really successful businessman, you don't need to necessarily be out there talking to other people you don't even know, about your experiences and about business. What motivated you to start your Ditch Digger CEO podcast?
I consider myself kind of a hillbilly, and as a hillbilly, I didn't really respect my education in business that much until I began in my, let's say, late 30s, early 40s, telling my story. And telling my stories, I inspired other people to do things they might not have done otherwise. So eventually I was like, gosh, this is kind of fun. Actually, people were telling me that my story made a difference to them. So, and I knew that for sure my form of education, while not formal, right, has been through mentorship. And so I really have gotten into mentorship in a big way as a leader in business. So my goal was this. I became successful because of all those people I paved driveways for or did parking lots for that had a nice building, a nice business, a nice house. I'd ask them, how the heck did they do it, right? And they would tell me their stories. Some would not, right? Some wouldn't tell me their stories, but usually I figured out that they were kind of the J.B. Pritzkers of the world that, didn't really build it themselves and couldn't really tell the story that would actually mean much to me probably, right? So it's nice they didn't tell me their stories in some cases, but those that told me their stories always were those that busted their butt to build something really neat, right? Whether it's a small business that gave them the ability to send their kids to college and build themselves a good life, or those that were, just crazy successful that built amazing businesses employing millions of people. I think of people like Bernie Marcus, who's been a mentor of mine, and friends like Jimmy John and different people that have been just crazy successful. These people overall always are servant-minded people that just want to serve a big market. And so, gosh, there's just nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with somebody that wants to serve a market better than anybody else. And I find that boy, 99% of the time, that's the stories that build America. It's not the J.B. Pritzkers of the world and those that hand it to them. Although sometimes I do have friends that had a lot handed to them and make a lot of it and have still that work ethic and that drive. That's not as common in my opinion, but it is out there, right?
Sure.
So again, for me, I want to tell these stories to others. So the stories that I heard and more, I want to find those stories and tell them on Ditch Digger CEO, inspiring hopefully millions of people to think differently about not being envious of anybody, but actually being inspired by stories so that they could do their own story. They could live their own story as an entrepreneur someday, right? So sure. I'm confident it's happening. We've got tens of thousands of listeners now, and we've done no advertising for it at all yet, right? So it's not 1 million listeners yet, but we're getting 100% 5 ratings on it, which is kind of cool because I'm doing it in kind of a rough way. I'm not. This isn't something that's that well planned. Actually, it's pretty off the cuff. But it's stories of Jimmy John, my own story. It's stories of the Netflix founder and the Redbox founder and the Brightstar founder. Many people that just found something they're passionate about and served the market better than anybody else in the world. And good things happen then, right? And I'm a Catholic Christian guy, right? And for me, what am I taught in my Christian faith is, to serve others, more than you serve yourself. And if you think that way in business, you're going to be rewarded in life, in my opinion. Now you're going to have challenges, not only going to be all rosy, but overall you're going to be rewarded if you can serve a market better than anybody else in the world. And right. So that's in my opinion the world of differentiate or die is what I call that. If you can differentiate strong and serve a value better than anybody else in the world, in your space, boy, you're gonna have some opportunity like nobody else.
Right. That's an inspiring message. Gary, I once had a really successful entrepreneur tell me, he said, the best business book in the world is the Holy Bible, that those principles work not just for your spiritual life, but they also work for enterprise, to your point of an attitude of service of others and selflessness. And those principles obviously carry through to successful entrepreneurs. And, I want to ask you about, the Ditch Digger aspect, because your approach, it seems like in many ways you kind of channel Mike Rowe from of Dirty Jobs fame, that you are very focused on the non-glamorous businesses, places that the kinds of activities which maybe aren't sexy, but can be really, really rewarding financially and otherwise. Is that true?
Yeah, you know what? I started out, I was blessed to start out in the non-glamorous businesses, right? Not a lot of people go to college, like my friends, to go to college then and say, man, I want to be an asphalt paving guy, right? Or boy, I just want to pave concrete, right? It's not, or do roofing or doors and docks, right? These are things that are sexy and exciting to most. So the blessing of that really, Steve, is that, we've been able to figure out ways to bring technology into these dirty spaces. And so our technology has really driven our growth and our success in many aspects. So what's fun is, take the dirty businesses, add technology, and boy, you can be in a place like nobody else, because it's not that common that people are paving parking lots and saying, man, how do we use AI? How do we use drones? How do we use satellite imagery to do this better for our customers? And so we do all that today better than anybody else in the world. And so that's been a big deliverer of success for us. We use drones and artificial intelligence to assess pavements all over the country. And now my son's looking at building all over the world. My son started the business with me. We're using drones to do like pavement engineering, roof engineering and maintenance to customers all over the country. We now have over 1 billion square feet of pavements that we help our customers manage using drones and satellite imagery. We partnered with a company from Israel. We're able to see water underground as much as 10 feet underground using satellite imagery, which nobody else in the world can do except us and our partners in Israel now. So again, these are all products that make us so different from our competition that our customers are like, they come to us on an annual basis, say, okay, what's next, Rayvine? Where's the industry going, right? And so we have here the uneducated hillbilly that I am. I didn't go to college, so I built my own facility in Schaumburg, Illinois. It's called Rayvine University, where we have 15 different types of roofs on our roof with every type of green roof you could imagine, and 18 different types of pavements on our parking lots, basically showing our customers what's out there, what's coming, what we're experimenting with. And again, so it's been kind of fun to say, gosh, you know what, how do we educate our customers better than anybody else in the world? And we're not only doing that, but then growing businesses around it, which is just fun, really a lot of fun.
Sure. No, it's so exciting. And to your point, a lot of businesses that may seem to an outsider or to the novice eye may seem to be low tech are actually very, very high tech. For instance, the way you approach paving, which I think is fantastic. So, all right, listen, last question for you, Gary. I want to ask you if you can look forward as an entrepreneur into the future. What are you most excited about if President Trump wins re-election for the economy? What most scares you about a President Biden, God forbid?
Well, that's really easy to me, Steve. I've been heavily involved in stuff here nationally, in business networks and other nonprofit organizations, and boy, leaders of all these groups are really, really worried if Biden wins that we will go into a recession pretty fast. When you have a person that wants to be president that brags about shutting down our economy 100%.
Gary, I know you're working so hard to reelect this president. We sure appreciate everything you're doing, folks. Check out Gary's Ditch Digger CEO podcast. Gary, thanks for being on the show. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Steve.
Kamala Harris ran for president by rushing to the radical left, embracing Bernie's plan for socialized medicine, calling for trillions in new taxes, attacking Joe Biden for racist policies. Voters rejected Harris. They smartly spotted a phony. But not Joe Biden. He's not that smart. Biden calls himself a transition candidate. He is handing over the reins to Kamala while they jointly embrace the radical left. Slow Joe and phony Kamala. Perfect together. Wrong for America.
As we have already seen, his America First agenda has lifted all Americans up and have empowered them with true economic emancipation that has once again made the American dream possible. That's why I want you to text EMPOWER to 88022 right now if you want to keep America great and deliver 4 more years for President Donald J. Trump.
Welcome back. We need your help to defend our country against Joe Biden and the radical Democrats. The stakes could not be any higher this November, folks. We need all the patriots at home watching right now to join our fight to re-elect President Donald J. Trump. Here's how you can get involved. Download the new groundbreaking Trump 2020 app. It's now available on Apple and Android. To stay in contact with us, please text Trump to 88022. That's Trump to 88022. If you or your friends, family, or neighbors want to be involved in our fight to re-elect President Donald J. Trump, please visit armyfortrump.com to sign up. Follow me, please, on social media